only that Ouija. It's more just it's
Good evening. Thank you all for joining us as we celebrate the launch of Nigel Featherstone's My Heart is a Little Wild Thing, for which he is in conversation with Yorick Smaal. It will also be preceded by a short literary salon with John Arnold and that's a little bit of climactic build-up for you, all from James Casey. My name's Jackie. Before we commence, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Jagera and Turrbal people, and the traditional owners of the lands from which people are zooming in on tonight. I also pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that we are on unceded land. There's a little housekeeping before we begin. People who are here in person tonight, we ask you to put your phones on silent. You're welcome to keep them on and to tweet at avidreader4101. Anybody needing the bathroom is welcome to walk past everybody else here through that gate and a few meters down, head towards the light. Some of you have already found the bar. It will open again after this event, so you can have another drink and talk about how good it was. There will be a Q&A at the end of this session. We ask that the author or chair repeats any audience question just so people listening at home on Zoom before that question is answered. For people that's on Zoom, you're able to ask any questions using the chat box. We'll also be pasting a link that you can use to purchase a copy of the book online. If you do it during the event, we can ask the author to sign it for you at the end. Copies of the book for people here in person tonight are available at the counter. So to start with the salon, our first reader tonight, John Arnold, is from Far North Queensland. He began writing fiction when interned at Brisbane Boys Catholic School. He won the Bristol Short Story Award in 2013, and his last play, The Garden of Lost Things, was produced in Melbourne in 2019. He writes fiction when he's coping, terrible poetry when he isn't, and plays when a director forces him. Please make him welcome.
Thank you. Her what lives over the fruit shop. I didn't know her name, still don't. It seems monstrous, but also appropriate. She became an emblem, a signal declaring something I wasn't yet able to define. People like that don't need a first name. They're delineated in bold colours, and a name would make them human, make them grey. I don't know where she came from. She was white and spoke English, though I only heard her voice twice, and both times she was screaming. She was a well-known figure on East Street. She sat alone every morning at the International Cafe, reading out-of-date copies of Woman's Life and drinking their terrible cappuccino. She was, it must be said, not a terribly successful woman. She had a long face and thick, rough skin. Her hair had been savaged by a vicious perm, perhaps in an attempt to distract from encroaching baldness. I remember she dressed down, what Mum called a housecoat, always in brown, tracksuit bottoms from Pound Stretcher, and occasionally a scarf and dark glasses. I never understood why she wasn't wearing dresses. What was the point if you didn't have the thrill of the skirt? Anyone could wear trousers, boys were allowed to wear trousers. And why brown? I hated brown. My fantasy world was coloured in Barbie pink, Easter egg gold and bright white. Wasn't everyone's? It was 10 years before I recognised it as a survival strategy. Different from my own and frankly, more effective. She was one of those small brown tinted creatures that blend in with the forest floor. She found safety in obscurity. My method was flawed. Being what men desire, making them want to possess rather than destroy you. Fine in theory, but some men don't ever want to let you go. My mum would always smile at her in the street, wait until she passed, and then say, "Poor woman." What malady she was suffering from was never mentioned, but it was made clear that hers was a tragic existence. To her credit, Mum never gossiped about her what lives over the fruit shop, and very few people seemed to twig. Adults would see her taking the lady's coat, the perm and the scarf, and create an uninteresting woman around these spare details. Our fathers with their pints would say, "All right, love," when she passed the barley mow. Mr. Jones and the butchers would say, "Morning, dear." But children are free from the tunnel vision of adults. They know what men look like, they know what women look like, and when they see someone who's both or neither, they take notice. Jace and the crew used to torment her. They'd mug faces at her through the windows of the cafe, trail behind her like an honor guard while she tried to shop on East Street. "Looking for something to take it down with, are you, Munter? Sorry, am I getting you hard? Are you getting a great big stiffy? Are you though?" She withstood these attacks with an eerie quiet. It was though the boys in their mouths were a jackhammer outside her window, irritating but nothing personal. This calm was remarkable in a suburb where weeknights were set to the music of domestic disturbances, and every Saturday night ended in a fight outside the Barley Mow. People wondered why she didn't bite back. They thought this strange, quiet woman must be a mentalist. But we understood each other, her and me. Whenever I was in the cafe with Mum, my eyes would find hers. She would feel me watching her look up and smile. This is someone I knew would understand. Someone who knew the beautiful chill of silken jersey on your naked skin. Someone given the same thrill by halting mid-spin and feeling fabric wrapped around your thin, hairless legs. She knew what it was to lose yourself in ecstasy and fake pearls in front of your mother's mirror. Then the disappointment of the spell being broken. That crushing glimpse of flat boy chest.
Thank you very much. Our next reader, Wolfram James Kessing, is a UQ Masters of Writing, Editing and Publishing graduate, as well as an alumni future leader. Their work appears in pastel, gulp and fruity, but they're usually seen working at Brisbane Queer Film Festival, Brisbane Writers Festival and Festival of the Photocopier. Their first short story, Heartstring, was published in Gorilla Press's premier Crackle Anthology of Creative Writing in October 2021. Please make him welcome.
Tell me where.
Yes. Looks good.
This is good.
Looks good.
All right. Sorry if I don't look up. You're all very beautiful, and I'm in danger of falling off. Well, yeah, my voice calls from behind, cutting Philly off as he begins another story. We twist around to find father as he lurches out from crowd and leans on the bar next to us. He's lost his jacket, yet he's still sweaty. He calls the automaton behind the bar to bring him another drink. "So this is where you've been hiding." "At the bar isn't hiding, father. You smell like you should have found us by now." And he does. The strong odor of stale beer permeates from his sweaty shirt, tells me he's had more than enough to drink, just not from the bar his son's been sitting at all night. "Not tonight, boy. I'm not in the mood." He raises an eyebrow to Finley and cocks his head, gesturing for Finley to leave so he can have a word alone with his son. "I don't want to be rude to our guests here, but as you were, sir," Finley says. "I need to get this one home to bed anyway." I help rest Toby against Finley's chest, the sleeping boy's legs swinging from Finley's arms like an oversized Raggedy Andy. Being this close emphasizes how short Finley is compared to me. His body toned like a docker's, yet small, from what Sarah calls a rough childhood. You don't see it sitting next to him. My body is tall and broad compared to his, the result of a childhood dominated by sports, good food, and privileged oblivion. It feels wrong not to bear Toby's weight for myself tonight. I want to carry Finley's burdens, but mostly, I just don't want to be left here without them. "I said the world's at war," father repeats, his first words lost to Finley's departure. "I know this city makes it easy to remove yourself from the world that's war, but we cannot neglect our responsibilities as men of the atomic age. The British bunker down, the Americans roll out their machines, and sooner or later, son, you'll have to accept the responsibility of being my son." I gotta ask, but I already know where he's going with this. We've played this game before. I search the room for a lonely woman who looks like she's been promised a simple life married to a snobbish son. And there she is, standing by the punch bowl, a young brunette with hidden dimples, trying not to appear obvious as she glances our way. "You're unbelievable. On Sarah's wedding night and everything." "Look, William," father says. He swallows the last half of his beer and clamps down on my collarbone with his meaty hand. Her family's invested in the Western Front, nuclear armaments, all of that. So I'm not asking to love her, just to marry her. Give me some damn grandkids so I stop worrying about you. The brunette smiles when I look to her again. Poor girl. Were there a decent man to meet tonight, he would take her out and show her she deserved more than what my father promised her. But here I am instead, the deviant. Numbed on scotch and pretenses, more willing to stumble out into a dream world tonight than comfort a fellow lost soul. But we don't want to appear cruel now, do we, Father? He pats me on the back with a smile, and I fear he doesn't grasp my disposition at all until I finish my drink, grab my coat, and exit past the brunette. I look for Finley outside, but he's left, so I reluctantly head for the Gresham.
And housekeeping, thank you. So it's time for the person of the hour. I can read your bios as you gradually make your way up. We can build more tension if you like. So Nigel Featherstone, the author tonight, whose book is being launched, is the author of Bodies of Men, which was longlisted for the 2020 ARA Historical Novel Prize, highly commended for the 2020 ACT Book of the Year, shortlisted in the 2019 Prince and Literary Awards, and received a 2019 Canberra Critics Circle Award. Nigel lives on southern tablelands of New South Wales and spends considerable time in Canberra. In conversation tonight with Yorick Smaal, a senior lecturer at Griffith University, Australia, where he teaches and researches histories of sexuality. Yorick is the author of Sex, Soldiers and the South Pacific, 1939 to 45, Queer Identities in Australia in the Second World War, and is currently completing his second book, A Comparative Study of Both Sex and Crime in Australia and England. Please make them both welcome.
Thanks so much, Jackie, and it's great to be here with you tonight, Nigel. Heads up, we already had a little bit of a chat about the book, and we ran in over like 45 minutes, just getting excited about all of the different themes and the different elements of the story. So
we might be still here at midnight.
We might be, that's quite possible. I want to start by saying I loved this book. And actually, it really, I was just saying to my friend before, it actually really brought me back to the love of reading. Partially because it's just such a beautiful story, and it's a very powerful, but elegantly and simply told story. And I thought I'd start tonight by asking you a little bit about the bush. And it's such a central theme to the story you tell here. And in some ways, it's actually signalled by the title, I think. And the Australian landscape is this kind of mysterious and kind of untamable place, really, that has this inexorable pull that is so dominant, I think, in Australian fiction. And in this story, you write so evocatively about the Monaro region and the land's beauty and its power, and its secrets and its honesty. And I was wondering if you could tell us tonight a little bit more about why the natural setting is so important to the narrative you tell here. And I might add, the animals that populate it.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, and congratulations on those two wonderful readings. So, yes, congratulations. They're beautiful. Thank you for that wonderful question. Where do I start? I think place and landscape have always been very important to me. I grew up in Sydney, and I spent the first 8 years of my life in the same rather fancy suburb in Sydney, but very lucky to be close to the northern beaches of Sydney and also the Blue Mountains and also the Kooringa National Park. So I think spending the first 18 years of my life in the same place meant that I, in terms of my sort of Western sort of sensibility, maintained quite a close connection to those places. But I left Sydney at 18, and partly because I knew that I would not survive if I stayed in that environment. I grew up in a very conservative neck of the woods. So I moved to the very radical, very edgy, wrong side of the tracks, Canberra. But I did, one of the things that's amazing, and there are some Canberrans here tonight, which is lovely. There is so much nature around Canberra, the mountains, and the landscape is very close. Even just with Blake Griffin and all the amazing parks, all that kind of stuff. But then I spent really the last 12 years living in regional New South Wales, a place called Goulburn. But just sort of an hour and a half south of Canberra is where the Monero is. And there's no sign that says you're entering the Monero. It's not, there is a federal electorate called Monero, but there's no sign. But everyone who lives in that neck of the woods knows about the Monero. It's about 150 square kilometres of nothing. And it's between far south coast of New South Wales, around Eden, and the Snowy Mountains. And it's just a barren plain. And there's two theories. One is that it's always been barren for millennia, and the other is that at some point it was burnt out. But I've always been really fascinated because everyone talks about the Monero, and it's interesting that the car is the Monero, but the actual place is the Monero. And people who live down there say, remember, it's air, Monero, because the air is so beautiful. But it has a very, very, very long winter. If you did, your car broke down in the middle of winter, or even in spring or autumn, you probably wouldn't survive because it's so cold. And then the summer is very, very short. In fact, people say that down there that you can't grow tomatoes really big, unless behind plants. There's also big sky country. It's there because there are very few trees, almost you can drive for 10, 20, 30 kilometers and see no trees. I think a human being feels very present and very aware of themselves in this particular landscape.
So I'm just to interject there.
It's almost quite dangerous.
I was going to ask you, do you think that kind of sense of self-awareness or that self-discovery has something to do with that kind of concept of barrenness or nothingness that you kind of just gestured to in your description?
Yeah, I think so. And for those who need to know just a little bit more about the book, I do describe it like a three-way novel story. It's a love story between a man and his mother, a man and another man, and a man and this place of the Monero that was very important to him when he was a child. And his family just rented a steading, which is actually a barn, when he was very young. And I think that when he was down there, he was very happy. So this part of his journey is going back to childhood when he was happy. But also I think he actually needed to be shocked into finding himself. And he was only going to do that when he was in the Monero. And I think something else that I've been doing lots of events to change lots of people. And I think for any writer in the room, I know there's many of you, that there's when we're writing novels, sometimes we're aware of what we're writing, and then sometimes there's things that we don't know until it's after it's published. And sometimes it's not for years later. But I think I've realized, Yorick, that Patrick needs to re-find a sense of wonder and that sense of curiosity that children have, that everything's fine. You see a little animal over there. If I saw two little red animals over there, I'd run a little eyes, I'd run a mile. But
yeah, that's after I pushed you over to get out first.
Yes, that's right. But where a child, I might just go, oh, check out that, just have that curiosity. And so he needs to rediscover his curiosity if he's to move forward.
No, that's such a great answer. I wasn't quite sure because I came to the book with no knowledge of what it was. And so in my mind, I was almost thinking it was kind of this fantastical creature that might be there. So it was a very pleasant surprise as the story unfolded. And I kind of walked with Patrick through his kind of self-discovery and his journey of self, as he tries to work out the complexities of his life at that point.
Can I share a quick
Yes, of
anecdote?
course.
So I had been working on the novel for quite a few years, and it wasn't until I actually stayed on it in a steading down on the Monero in just after the fires in 2020. And so I was writing about a particular animal that is almost extinct, and it is a cousin of the Tasmanian tiger, but it does still exist, just it's just young. And so when I stayed in this steading, and I'm not making any of this up, I went to sleep. So the steading is just a farm, but it's got rooms in it where you can actually sleep. And it's about 150 years old or whatever. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this sound just going. And
That's a great impression.
it is a very bad impression. But also because down there, no phones work, there's no internet or anything. So if you get, if you get in trouble, you're really in trouble. And I just was lying there going, oh, it's just because I've been working on this novel. I think I'm just imagining hearing the sound. It was like midnight, and then I hear this thing. And I was thinking, what if there is one right outside the door right now? And because I'm a very brave, tough human being. I didn't get out of bed. But also I was too scared to turn on the light. And so I thought, well, I've got a phone. I could just go out and just sort of see this animal. And I thought, no, I might get lost or something. And I heard it one more time. And then in the morning, I thought, I think I must have dreamt that, surely. I must have dreamt that I heard that animal. And you'll have to read the book to find out what
Exactly. Let's move the conversation from our relationship with kind of the bush and nature to human interactions, which I think is, really the kind of core issue that your book unpacks. Mother-daughter relationships are a very kind of persistent and powerful, engaging cultural narrative, but this book shifts the discussion and it talks about that mother-son relationship. And I wanted to ask you if you thought there was a different story of kin relationships to be told there, and if so, why do you think that's the case?
I think there's certainly an interesting relationship between gay men and their mothers, and I think we could talk about Patrick White. In the David Marr memoir, Patrick White fears that he's going to die on the loo because his mother died on the loo, and we could spend a little bit of time sort of unpacking the sort of psychology around that. And I think that a lot of, I think I'm the youngest of three boys, and I think my mother was very clever in going, eldest one, no, he's not going to be loyal. The middle one, no, he's not going to be loyal. But the slightly effeminate one, he might be hanging around, natural nerves. So I personally had a very close relationship with my mother, but as I aged, it actually became quite fractured, and for the last 5 years, we were actually estranged, except for her final year, and so she went into dementia, the ward of dementia. And we did reconnect, which was amazing that we reconnected when she was 99% dementia. And it was amazing. She would be sitting there in her nursing home, and she would just go, crocodile. I don't know what the crocodile is. And then she would just go, I love you with every fibre of my being. And so this incredible kind of, she knew she was going, and so she has now died. And really, even though I had been working on this novel for a very long time, as soon as she died, I thought, who was she? I needed to find a way of understanding her, and then I stayed down on the Monero, and then I ditched the manuscript I was working on, and then I drove 3 hours home, went in, put I have to wear the same writing outfit, which is Ugg boots, it was very stylish, Ugg boots, tracksuit pants, and actually a jumper that my mother used when I was 15, and I always lived it was a very cold place, and I wore that, and then I rewrote the novel by hand, as in pen on paper, in 14 days. And I think because I just needed to explore motherhood.
Yeah, that's a really powerful story. And I think that really kind of comes through in the novel, because for me, when I was reading this, so much of it is relatable. Like, I feel that every person in this room can actually relate to some element of the story that's being told here, whether that's the individual who remains behind to look after the parent, whether it's siblings who disappear and follow their own path, whether it's a kind of complexity in those strained relationships between family, because we don't get to choose our biological family. It's something we're just born into, and you have to kind of navigate whatever kind of relationships are there. And sometimes they're amazing and you're lucky that they're your best friend. And other times it's,
not so much.
Well, yeah, I kind of think of like maybe a bad work colleague or something you've just got to kind of manage. So, for me, that I think was a really kind of very powerful element of the book that I could relate to, not only directly, but also through seeing my family members go through the same kind of thing. And I think it's a very common story. And I think that, that's a really big attraction in the book. As a historian, I wanted to ask you about history as one of the book's key themes, but not as a discipline, but really as an experience that informs the human condition. Now, your narrator, Patrick, he wants to quarantine the past, effectively put the past where it belongs. But at one point in the book, he begrudgingly admits that, you know, the past is foundation, to quote. And I wanted to ask how vital you thought that kind of, that history, his experience, that past was, not only to his character, but to the actual telling of the story, so that there are these moments where we kind of drift between the kind of contemporary setting that the story tells, and then it kind of drifts back to these moments, various moments in the past, whether that's childhood or university, or even his relationships with female friends. And so all of this kind of provides this kind of rich layering of character. And just I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that process and about your thinking in terms of, you know, how you brought that together.
Where do I start? In those 14 days, it was just a mad white heat of writing. It was very much a stream of consciousness. I had other versions of the manuscript which I did ditch. And then once I knew it was about this man who had obeyed his mother. She didn't want him to be gay. She didn't want him to be a writer, and she wanted him to live in her street. And I wanted to write basically Patrick's memoir of the time, and he does something terrible at the beginning, which might be slightly hinted at here. He does a dreadful thing in the first sentence. And then he needs to go back and start again and get his life on a better track. And so I was really interested in what sort of things would he remember from his childhood? What would he go back and want to explore? What things were important to him? What are the lovely things? What were the not so lovely things? And to rebuild that foundation so he could actually then find himself. And I knew that the novel spans five years, and I was very keen by the end, I guess, for him to be in a very different place. So I think I'm really interested in history as a reader in terms of what happened to a character in their past to make them who they are. Can they move on from those? How do they move on from those? What stays with you? I'm very interested in the body, full stop. But I'm also interested in writing from the body. And that the older I get, the more I realise that the less of this that goes on and the more of this that goes on. But I'm also interested in Patrick reclaiming he's 45 when the novel starts, and he's actually a virgin. And that for a lot of it was about claiming history, claiming his body rather, but also I think that we do keep every experience that we've ever had is in our bodies. So he has to really re-examine his history in terms of then rebuilding his body.
Wow, that's really very interesting response, because I think it kind of talks to kind of not just kind of psychological memory, but also muscle memory.
What body memory?
Yeah. And you know, he's 45 and I'm 45 as well. Right. I'm not a virgin. Add a little bit of levity. Yeah, it's this kind of really interesting way that the kind of the human condition is kind of shaped by our experiences, our interactions with our environment, with other people, and this idea that kind of character, and this is something I really loved about Patrick, is that the character, just like all of us in this room, are complex. And so many stories often, they try to capture an individual kind of on one level, where it's kind of this kind of literary trope or this kind of tool that kind of pushes a particular point of view. But with Patrick, you kind of get this kind of really kind of mixed sense of who he is, that, you know, sometimes he's confident, sometimes he's not. He's very clear about this, but he's unsure of this. He loves this, but he doesn't like this. He's calm and collected, but sometimes he loses his cool. And I feel for me, that's exactly what we are as human, right? Which is a bit of everything. And that all kind of comes out in the novel. I'm going to move to a difficult question now, and it kind of jumps on from what we just talked about. And you were just sort of saying earlier that, you know, Patrick kind of talks about all the different things that he feels he needs to explore as part of his kind of process of, I suppose, narrating the novel, really. And history overlaps with memory, and both are partial and both are fractured. Now, one of Patrick's recollections in this book still haunts me, and it goes to the heart of this mother-son dynamic that you explore. And you'll remember the scene where Patrick and his lover Lewis share secrets that nobody else knows. And I quote here, "It's possible my mother did something to me," Patrick confesses. Now that takes the shape of his mother's bedtime tickling, including his genitals, and that occurs more than once. Patrick's unsure what to make of this behaviour, and it ceases at puberty, but he's disturbed enough to raise it. And it really marks this powerful, vulnerable moment of truth between two lovers. The topic never surfaces again in the entire narrative, but it's clearly important enough that it's raised by the central character. And I want to know why, and I want to know more.
Heavens above Yorick, you go to some deep places. I guess the novel does that, so you're just going where it needed to go. Where do I go? I think one of the, how about I go here? One of the things that was really instrumental, and I think for any writer in the room, that sometimes we have these sort of epiphanies or an epiphany made for us. And I actually, I do a libretto, and I've written some lyrics, and sometimes I write poetry, whatever. And I did do a poetry workshop with an amazing Australian poet called Melinda Smith, who's one of the Prime Minister's poetry. And she introduced me to the concept of duende, which comes from Lorca, which is the devil muse. And, for Lorca, it comes from the gypsy tradition, and it's also about flamenco. And it's actually about the wrestle with good and bad, and it's the wrestle with, for him, it's the duende is the goblin muse. It's this goblin devil muse that's over there. And for Lorca, it's about, you can write a lovely poem about, crossing a stream, or you could write about drowning a friend. And that's the devil muse, saying, how about we write a more interesting poem about drowning a friend? And for Melinda Smith, it's actually her duende is, the duende muse encourages her to write poems that say things that she's not allowed to say. And she's not a queer woman, but for her, it's often about mental illness and mothers and motherhood. And that just really illuminated something for me, where when I was writing, actually, I had some key words on the top of my pad, and one of them was simplicity, another was brevity, and another was duende. And so when I was writing, and I guess learning to write from the body. And Tim Minchin talks about this, being the comedian and the composer. He says, trust the spine tingles. The spine tingles never lie. And if he's writing a song and he gets a spine tingle, he knows he's onto something. If there's no spine tingles, then the audience is probably not going to have a spine tingle. And I've just realised that we're up on age of 53 and 3 degrees and lots of things in my life, that basically everything is just about listening to my stomach. And if I get a buzz in my stomach, then I'm onto something. And I think that's duende taking me to really, if I'm scared, if I'm frightened, if I'm really worried about what people think, then I'm going to go there. And it is true, when I sent my manuscript to Gabby Nair, my agent, I really wanted her to reject it, because you've noticed, I've been with her for a while. I really hope she would say, we're not putting this in the world. Unfortunately, she really liked it. And then she sent it to Rob Walcott, my publisher, and I thought, no, he's not going to put this in the world. And he said, no, I really like it. So here we are. Thank you for celebrating this moment with me. So part of it was just about me following Patrick, and it is Patrick's memoir. It's written in the first person. It's Patrick's memoir. And when I got the final box of books and I opened it, I literally thought, I hope Patrick's memoir goes well. So it really feels if it's Patrick. And then if I'm listening to duende and I'm listening to that devil goblin muse, then that's allowing Patrick to say things that maybe he would not say otherwise. But I also wanted to create a character that is complex and fraught and fragile, confident, all those things that we're talking about. And when I wrote that, when he shares that secret with Lewis, I thought, what's that there?
Yeah, no, I think
and I can only say that it's got something to do with the book.
Okay. I think that because I've read this book in one sitting, and we were talking about this, that there's so many layers to this story, right? So I feel like I'm going to have to probably go back and read it again, and probably again, because I think some of the connections that I've made between the themes or some of the kind of interpretations I've laid onto the text, I think warrant this reading. But what I actually wanted to do was to thank you for putting that in there, because I think there's a real power to speaking that truth. And this is something that I've been working on for a long time. And so we were actually saying last night, seem to be like on parallel stories. We work on, queer soldiers, and then, lo and behold, there are, these moments that dovetail between the kind of work that I've been doing on boys and sex and crime and these kind of moments. And what I especially liked, I think, about that was this uncertainty about how he reconciled that with his mother. And it wasn't about whether that kind of behavior occurred, but the difficulties of kind of reconciling this very troubled and difficult relationship. And that leads me to my next question, which is about Patrick's mother, who I hate. She's frustrating, she's challenging, she's very unlikable. She's manipulative, she's oppressive, she's cruel, and she's domineering. I mean, really, in some ways, this is kind of the classic kind of Freudian relationship, the absent father, the overbearing mother. But apart from a sense of her very unhappy marriage and the very occasional little tidbit of her life, the conditions of her character remain a mystery. And I wanted to know, was that deliberate in terms of your kind of crafting of the story?
I think there's an element of, one of the questions that drove the novel was, who was my mother? And this sense of I'll never really get to know her. And it's far too late to ask her because she's no longer around. And so that sense of incompleteness that I always have about my mother, that Patrick will always have with his mother. So I think that was a part of it. How do you ever get to know anybody? I've been in my partner team for 25 years now, and there's still times when I think, I just don't know who you are. He just bought a very expensive watch the other day, and I went, did not think that was one of your values, Tim. I'm trying to sell books here, dude. But I think I find that really fascinating, or when someone will say something that's very strange to you, or people have friends for my whole life, and you just never get to know. But how do you get to know a mother? And so, and it is all written from Patrick's perspective. So I do actually feel, and this is something that I'm uncomfortable talking about, but also comfortable talking about. I'm trying to get more comfortable about it. And I do think it's a feminist novel. It is an anti-patriarchal novel, and I don't think that Meredith ever found her place. She's trapped by a terrible marriage. She's trapped by a society, by a marriage structure, and that she never fulfills herself. So she is, I think, a part human, because that's how the society actually treated her. And I think Patrick recognises that there's pieces missing that she could never find. A male perhaps still can go through a bit of a self-fulfilling narrative, but can others? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and I think that kind of plays into that kind of complexity of character. And I think, from that feminist perspective as well, it's not about excusing the behaviour. It's actually just about explaining the conditions that kind of enable, or kind of the context for these kinds of behaviours when, women are, subjugated and repressed. And, it's funny because the husband is such a marginal character, but he's even more horrible than the mother, right? So it kind of gives you this kind of layered kind of narrative of the different kinds of complexities to the human condition, but also to the kind of the difficulties of family, I think. Let's move from mothers to sex.
I've waited a long time for somebody to say that to me.
So obviously, Patrick's relationship with Meredith is really kind of a core part of his opposite sex relations, and there are some other kind of relationships that he has with university friends, and that's kind of integral to his sense of self and his kind of queer subjectivity, if you will. I recently read a review, and I'm going to quote here, that said that, quote, the sex scenes read a little smutty. And yes, I thought that was a really odd turn of phrase. I double checked my understanding of the word something and went back to the dictionary and I was like, I don't think that it's dirty or it's indecent. And I think that if you actually read that against, the context of Patrick's character, that doesn't ring true to me, because after all, he's repressed, he's closeted, he's this middle-aged man, he's 45, he's a virgin, he's struggling with intimacy, and these moments in the novel where we were talking earlier about kind of his history kind of flash back to his real kind of struggle with the body, actually, and his sense of really being comfortable in his body and the desire of that body and the desirability of other bodies. And he also has difficulties discerning sex from love, which actually was, on a very personal level, quite resonant for me, actually, just thinking about how we often really struggle to kind of reconcile our sexuality. And we're often so rejected by family and others that, I often feel that queer men, certainly from my perspective, can, when in their younger years, kind of really get those two things confused. Maybe that's just being very personal and very vulnerable, but it's also this sense that if you're sexually desirable, you're valid as a person. That you confuse that kind of unconditional childhood love with intimacy, and they're quite different things. Now, notwithstanding my personal confessions, I was just wondering what your response was to that type of observation, and also its importance, because this book actually really deals with questions of Australian manhood and masculinity. So for me, that kind of indexes a whole set of other problems that I wondered if you had anything to say about.
So the review that Yorick's referring to was in the Saturday paper, and it's actually quite a long, interesting review, but it does. It just says some of the sex comes across as smuggling.
It doesn't like the sex.
Doesn't like the sex. And at first I went, I don't like the sex. And then I looked it up like you did. I wanted to know exactly what I didn't the sense of the word, but I wanted to know. And it said obscene. And I went 53, and then the last I'm obscene. So I was very happy with that. When once I knew that it meant obscenity. But more, I think more seriously, I think because Patrick is discovering same-sex sex for the first time at 45. I don't want to spoil sort of the thread of the story, but he has been exploring sex, but not in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And there's no judgment on the page about any of it. And so for him, I thought as a character, and he's writing this memoir of this, meeting this amazing guy that he meets. And I think when we've all first done something, we remember it, don't we? I still remember the first time I kissed Tim. It was in a nightclub, and I remember thinking it was very, very nice. And then the next day, my female best friend, who would have thought I had a female best friend, she said, what was it like? And I said, I now know how Romeo and Juliet felt. Now, I guess the point of that sort of story, though, is that I remember it in great detail. We were halfway up the stairs. He was leaving the nightclub, probably wanted to leave, and I just kind of went after him, and we're still together.
Yeah, and I think that's really part of the story that's being told here is so honest, and you really feel that kind of that yearning, that hunger, that kind of exploration, the excitement, as you say, your heart stops in those moments.
It does, and I think it stops because you finally meet someone who's really lovely, regardless of gender. But I think that there's also a thing, I was born in 1968, and so I was 15 in 1983, if I've done my maths correctly. And in 1983, Australia New South Wales Parliament was debating to get rid of the known as anti-gay laws, but they're actually anti-soap laws, as you're well known. So I look at the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald as a 15-year-old and look at it and go, I see, right. I think that might have something to do with me. The other thing that happened, of course, in 1983 is I think called AIDS came to Australia. So I did go to an all-boys school, and I just knew immediately that if I sort of sensed that you might have been, us together sort of thing, and I touched you, I feared I would play things, and it wouldn't be put your mask on or whatever, and not sit down play with the pandemic, obviously, but I would die. I would get sarcomas and I'd be dead. I wouldn't see the end of year 9. And so that, I think, and David Marr talks a lot about this in terms of a lot of men of a particular era will have that shame in their bodies forever. And for me, writing those scenes was about, no, fuck that. I'm going to write out of shame to a point of just connection and intimacy. To me, it's just about intimacy and warmth and depth. It has nothing to do with body parts. It's just Patrick finally finding deep connection. And I wanted to write about that in a very tender, unshameful way.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that invocation of HIV/AIDS too is kind of very resonant because it's truthful and it's honest and it fits to the historical context, right? So, like, it's so easy, I suppose, to kind of cast your eyes back and kind of, you know, imagine what it might have been like, but to kind of, to project our kind of contemporary understanding on what it was like then. And like that, there was no internet in 1982, 1983. You know, you relied on, you know, the queer press to kind of give you your information and, you know,
or meet someone.
Exactly. And decades on, you know, science has completely changed. And so we often, it's so easy to take for granted how things were. And I think that for me is what was so odd, I think, about that kind of descriptional perspective. And what I felt was Patrick's kind of true sense of what that was for him. And especially because there's such a delay, obviously, between his kind of life course and his exploration of these kind of events.
I think Patrick would read the review and go, there's nothing smutty about it.
No, see, and I just thought it was raw and it was honest, you know, and again, you know, you're talking about your own experiences. And as soon as I read that, right, I was thinking, oh my God, I remember my first kiss, right? I was like, I know exactly where I was. It was like on the corner, just near the Wickham. And I was drunk. I remember, but I remember it is the defining moment of my life, right? Because it's all I had lived for 18 years was to do that. And like you couldn't breathe. And you remember everything about it. You remember the smell of the person and the taste of the person. And it's so visceral, right? Apparently I was a little rough and eager. But you know, that's to be expected.
That sounds a bit smutty.
It does sound better now, I promise. But no, there's this kind of, I think this is the power of the book, right? That like when you're reading it, you get caught off by moments. There's also an oh my God moment a bit later on in the book, and I won't even go there because you did catch me by surprise because I was totally not expecting that. But just talking about, you know, we've been talking about, you know, masculinity and we've been talking about intimacy and we've been talking about sex, and masculinity and maleness also appear in other forms. And, you know, I was particularly struck by this kind of very subtle thread of war and conflict through both historical actors as well as a few kind of literary techniques and objects in the book. And of course, immediately I went to your former novel, Bodies of Men, on war and maleness and intimacy. And I was thinking, you know, what was different about that book and this book, both in terms of the research and the writing? And, you know, was there a kind of a deliberate or consciousness, a deliberateness, I should say, or a consciousness to that kind of, you know, that very subtle kind of, you know, almost under the surface thread that almost links in some ways, you know, the previous novel and this kind of, you know, contemporary story that you're telling now?
I think that regardless of the gay thing, I think, you know, in Australia, I think a lot of men have been thinking about how we're meant to live. And if we look at the they've all been male except one, of course, prime ministers, it's interesting to see how masculinity is actually presented. And just in the change we've had in the last, month, we've gone from sort of, you know, incompetent alpha male to a much more sensitive, thoughtful, emotionally intelligent human being who can be quite open about having three flags behind him and not being confronted by that, where, you know, a couple of prime ministers before that, he would have to have, you know, 12 Australian flags to, you know, boost his masculinity and his sense of power and worth. You know, what a wanker. So I've been really, but also, you know, when he said, you know, he wanted a shirt from Putin, I mean, maybe he should have a shirt from Putin, but it's really what that language, I want a shirt from him. The only way he could actually confront his enemy was to sort of push him in his chest. I mean, how banal.
Sounds like a low moral rate to me.
Yeah, well. I have a theory about that. So I've been really interested in masculinity with Bodies of Men, which was basically a fuck you to the Anzac myth, not to service men and women, but to the Anzac myth that is used for political purposes and for nefarious purposes to control the populace. That we hold up a young white man in a uniform as the epitome of Australian existence, and that is just inherently damaging on every level. And so that's what drove Bodies of Men.
I was just going to say that actually there's a really kind of nice dovetail actually to your kind of feminist spin in this book.
Yeah,
because actually when you think about the Anzac legend and you think about that kind of mythology, it is so male. The whole idea of the nation in which we live has been founded upon the work of men. And women are deliberately kind of excluded from that narrative. So in a sense, this is kind of, almost a redress to that kind of story in a kind of reflexive way.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really interesting. And if we do criticize the Anzac legend, as we know, you get kicked out of the country. So it's outrageous. And that's what drove Bodies of Men. So I think it's interesting. I think that you're right, this has a more feminist, tender lens around that masculinity question.
Okay, questions? Are there any questions from the audience at this point? I have one question in reserve, so it's okay.
Sure. I can't wait to read the book, Nigel. Thank you. Can you talk about what happened between that frenzied 14 days of writing and publication? What shifted, if anything? Was that the draft that made it through to publication?
It is, yeah. Very good question. So I had been working roughly on the idea since 2007 and different versions. One of them, Gabby, my agent, hated with a passion. So, and anyone who knows Gabby, if she says that, she really means it. So I thought, okay, fair enough. Okay, that one might not go anywhere. But I just kept on returning to the idea, went down to that property, and it just completely changed it. And wrote it all from the body and just not fearing what anyone thought. And when Yorick was talking about that particular section, I thought, well, that's going in there. We'll just see where that goes. It's still in the book. I was then actually going to then send it back to Gabby and say, look, I think I've done a much better version of it from scratch. And then I got an incredible residency with Charlotte Wood at courtesy of the Byron Writers Festival with my friends and fellow novelists, Robert Carolla and Angela Keys. And really, Charlotte really encouraged me to actually go harder. And just as a little, I probably shouldn't say this. And I always say, don't spill the beans, but you've asked an open question, I'm going to spill the beans. I was really worried about the opening sentence. And I said to Charlotte, look, obviously where she's come from with the natural way of things, I said, look, I think the opening sentence is deeply problematic and I'm going to change it. And she said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I've got two softer versions. And she said, well, read them out to me. And I read out the first version, said, what's the second version? And she said, Nigel, both of those are truly terrible. You're just going to have to level up your things. And so she actually encouraged me to go further, go even harder in elements of it. And then I went back to Gabby and she said, yeah, that's terrific. And then it went to Robert Watkins, who published Bodies of Men when he was at a shed, and then he moved to Altamont and stayed with him. I did 40 drafts of Bodies of Men. There were 37 on my computer. We did 3 others with Hachette. With this one, it's about 12 in total. I did have the same editor, Ali Laveau, who edited both of them. Really, it was actually about getting as much accessibility and flow with this narrative as possible. And it's interesting, this conversation in a way is quite a contrast to what people are saying on social media, which is, oh, it's a lovely, tender, beautiful story, which it is. But I do aim to, as a writer, and I love this as a reader too, that maybe my first read as a reader is just, okay, that was lovely. Like Sigrid Nunes as the friend, some of you probably read it, but there's all these gazillion layers underneath it, and that's what I try to do. It probably got a little bit longer in those edits, and it probably just got much more precise. Ali Laveau has got this wonderful thing where she just writes NQR next to a sentence, and it's just not quite right. And quite a few of those. And then it went quite quickly. I guess I got Altamont at a particular point when I was very keen to get books into the world. but it still went through a lot of edits, a lot of edits. And it's probably the rawest book I've ever written, and I hope some of that rawness has remained there.
No, it definitely has. And it's interesting that you kind of talk about, being so anxious about the first sentence, because that just kind of sucked me in. I'm like, oh, let's move.
Yeah.
But and even the fact that you talk about, the multiple layers to this story, and we've talked about, it's so beautifully written, and it's just seriously simple, right? And as somebody who writes in a different kind of form, simple language is the hardest to do. So I tell my students all the time, actually, make complex ideas super simple.
And
It seems simple, but it's really hard.
I often look at something like Helen Garner's The Spare Room, where I just try, as my own little exercise, I try to just copy a paragraph and see how it's working. And you look at a Helen Garner sentence, you think that's not that hard. Turns out near impossible. I can't do it. I just can't get that simple, that level of simplicity and great emotional complexity.
Is there any other questions from the audience? Or yes,
Thank you.
Nigel, I've loved hearing about the development of the book. I wonder, do you feel changed by it now that it's out in the world as a writer?
I'm just going to repeat the question for people on
yes.
Zoom. So the question was whether Nigel had felt changed by the writing process as part of this novel.
I think I care less about what people think of me. Maybe that's an element of age and just getting reaching a point where you just no longer care that much. But that's, of course, the two things going at once, isn't there, where you care mega deeply, but also you try not to care. So I'm trying to sort of balance those two a bit more. All someone needs to do is send me a little message by Instagram and say they really enjoyed the story, and it just makes my day. So I'm sure you know what.
Yeah.
I think I want to be even more brave next time. I want to be I'm quite a cautious person naturally, and so I just would like to be even less cautious. And I guess writing Patrick writes the novel, it's him going from cautious, to much less cautious. And so I hope as a writer I'll become even less cautious.
It's almost that kind of reflexive process in the sense of watching Patrick develop as a character and trying to find himself, and to kind of just put his feet on a little bit of stable ground as he tries to kind of reconcile this chaos around him. And you kind of get a sense at the end of the book that he's worked a few little things out, and maybe that's also like part of the journey as a writer and as an artist and as a human, right? That we draw on our experiences, and that kind of helps us get a better sense of who we are and how we fit in the world. And you can only kind of work to the parameters that you've got.
Yeah, and I think the essence of plot that, and we've got to be very cautious of any of these sort of reductive ways of thinking, but plot probably is ignorance to awareness, and Patrick becomes slightly more aware of himself. And I think that one thing that I've realised over the last few weeks is that one thing I've become aware of is that for every hour of social contact I have to have 9 hours of non-social contact. So I think that's one thing I've become aware of, and I've become also like I just don't care. If I don't go out for 5 days in the past, I would have been like, oh God, you're a loser, and I couldn't give a shit.
These days you just kind of slip on those trucky decks and those Ugg boots and a nice woolly jumper and
go down to the supermarket.
Exactly, have a good time. On that note, I encourage everybody to purchase the book tonight. Nigel will be here and available to sign. I can tell you that it is a really brilliant read, and something that I think will speak to each and every one of you in your own way, because we're all part of a family. Whether that's something we're born into, whether it's something we make ourselves. And I think that as part of the kind of human experience, those kind of connections are always complex, and they're not simple. And despite the kind of the prose that you see and that you enjoy reading this book, neither is Nigel's story. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a real
Thank you
pleasure.
so much, Yorick, and thank you for having us.
I also thank our salon readers tonight, and thank you, Yorick, for your excellent. Did you get used to it?